So we've talked about, wokeness and social justice a little bit, and how the IDW exists perhaps in part in a reactionary way. But I want to ask, so we have this term that we like to use, woke supremacy, that I did coin. I will pat myself on the back a little bit.
Thank you, Scott.
But how would you define it? What do you think woke supremacy is?
Well, we talked earlier about who's welcome in the IDW, or what would be the test for it. And I think woke supremacy, from what I understand, is this purity test of wokeness, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I shy away, or I really hesitate on purity test for entry into anything. So, my understanding of woke supremacy is that it's, how woke are you? What level are you at? And, there's no measurable or definable,
Whatever
system.
it is, it has no redemption narrative.
Yes.
It has no. We were talking about this earlier. How it before we started recording, we were discussing how it has no end. Like wokeness, there is no point at which people say, "Okay, America is now sufficiently woke. We're done." It's something that is infinite in its dissatisfaction with the West.
There's an interesting moralizing component to it, maybe as well, where, and maybe that gets to the supremacy side of it, where it's not just society needs to be more woke. It's I'm a better person for being more woke than you,
and I will put the hammer down on you because you're worse than me. Like they will say, you are not sufficiently woke. I am gonna take away your rights to X, Y, and Z.
Right. And the people who, I'd say, it's an interesting problem. It's the bootlegger and the Baptist, and that there are people who want genuine social change, who want progressive values, who want equality in ways that certainly are lacking in the U.S. In a number of areas. But then they kind of get allied with these opportunists who
grifters,
want to fly a rainbow flag to sell more sneakers, and it's infuriating just to see that's a little strong. It's mildly irritating. I'm just going to correct myself here because I'm not looking at rainbow flags and thinking like, oh my God, Nike, why are you using this? It's like, come on, Nike.
Well, when they're all, when there's, what is infuriating is when there's 30 people around Brett Weinstein screaming at him that he's a racist, right? So that's infuriating. Like it does, and that's what we've seen is the acceleration of it. I mean, oh my God, it's only just existed in its current form for like a few years.
Sort of the tolerance by, I would say, the genuine people for the disingenuine people, where you have kind of this alliance where, maybe more. I'd say people with good intentions are willing to tolerate people with bad intentions and not call them out. Not call them out when they do something like bread, where they had no justification. And it wasn't denied by, I would say, the forces of good against the forces of evil.
Yeah, I would, if I can jump in, since I did sort of coin the term, and I'll pat myself on the back a little bit for that. But
do you want us to pat you on the back too?
I'll just be smelling my own farts over here. But anyway, so if I can just jump in and and the way I see it, just to simplify the concept, because I know it's something that isn't widespread at this moment of recording, but I hope that maybe it'll come into more widespread use. The idea of woke supremacy coming from me, and I believe I'm the first person to say it. Maybe there's somebody else who said it, but I feel like it was me. As far as I'm concerned, it is definitely a inherently political term, and as far as I'm concerned, it is the derogatory term for intersectionality. It is that there's sort of like there's an academic theory that you might call critical race theory, critical gender theory. There's a political movement that you would call social justice, and that can have positive connotations, and because maybe there are some positive aspects to it. But whenever it goes in a very negative direction, that is censorious, that is authoritarian, the derogatory term for that set of ideas and tactics is woke supremacy. That it's a catch-all term. I would just say it's something that, if I have any control over how it's used, it's a pretty broad derogatory term. It's not something particularly specific. It's just, if you want to accurately describe behavior that comes from intersectional ideology and critical race theory, critical gender theory, social justice, whatever you want to call it, and it's something overtly negative where somebody is putting down someone else, is violating someone else's rights, you'd call it woke supremacy, because on one hand you've got woke, which refers to the actual ideology itself. People know what woke means. And supremacy, or the noun is woke supremacist, what it says is there's a moral superiority and authoritarian aspect to this. It makes it inherently derogatory. And of course, unlike the term that I really hate, that I kind of came up with this term to replace, social justice warrior. Woke supremacist cannot be co-opted as a positive, and that is so important to me. And it's so important that I want people to use it, because when they say social justice warrior, first of all, it just sounds silly at this point. I don't know exactly why, but it's just not a good term to use. SJW or social justice warrior. I think because it was co-opted by the alt-right to a certain extent, of just like that's their catch-all for like everything that isn't alt-right. So I think that saying woke supremacist, and oh God, if you're in the alt-right, please don't co-opt this fucking term. Please don't do it. Please, they ruin everything. But anyway, it's like I feel like it's. Go ahead.
Yeah, to touch on what you said about it being authoritarian, I think that's actually also a really critical component to it, because it's not just I'm walking around thinking like I own the place. It's like, no, I will ruin your life.
Yeah. Or you have to use words that I tell you have to use. That's
so it's inherently
supremacist
illiberal
idea.
and maybe even broader, like a broader anti-Western sentiment.
Yeah.
Where, and maybe there's two things about it that I find really troubling, and I will fail to credit the person who came up with this idea, but it's a movement that takes itself so seriously that it can never laugh at itself. And so as a result, it's just this all-encompassing, like it's the world's like worst Reddit board or something, where it's just this dark spiral.
Tumblr, that's what Tumblr was.
That takes itself so seriously. And if you can't laugh at yourself, you can't see at your own, the flaws of your own group or your own movement. It's terrifying. I mean, it really is terrifying, because it is so unself-aware. And if it is always in the right, it is the theory of everything, and it's appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. I've referred to it lately as like a mind virus, social contagion. I've really gotten into a lot of derogatory terms coming up with woke supremacy.
So I would caution you actually against the mind virus thing, because it's the language of I guess illness and virus and disease is very often used by extreme right groups to justify really terrible things. So that's just just a slight language caution. I know that's not how you intend to use
another
it.
term that I mean, I guess you don't like the sort of like illness language.
Because then you can justify, well, we need to kill the virus.
Well, but I've also thought of it as like
we don't want
intellectual illness or intellectual weakness, in that it's like people's ability to reason. Intellectual laziness. Yeah, it's a better way to go with it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like the idea that it is contagious. I guess that's where I start wanting to use like the illness language and the sort of like.
I actually more liken it to, say, a conspiracy theory, because it's like a conspiracy theory that can't be disproven. It makes no falsifiable claims.
The white supremacist patriarchy is the theory. It's that America is a racist, sexist, horrible place. The West is a racist, sexist, horrible place. And it's something that, it's a lot like, I mean, I don't know, I come from the kind of new atheist part of the IDW, so I'm going to get into religion a little bit here. But, for me, I would always ask people when I was a kid, like, where is God? To prove to me that God exists. And they'd be like, well, he's everywhere, but he's nowhere, and you can't see him. And I'd always be like, well, this sounds like bullshit. And I sort of feel that way about the white supremacist patriarchy. But the thing that's so interesting about that, this is a really interesting thing to get into. So if woke supremacy is to some extent a religion, and we've discussed this before, and Peter Boghossian and James Field and Jordan Peterson also discussed this. A lot of people are talking about this. Dave Rubin's talking about this. If intersectionality and woke supremacy is a religion, and religions typically have a god, and that is sort of the myth, if you will, at least if you're coming from the atheist perspective. I know not to everyone is a myth, but say that's the sort of myth, the deity is God. That is the core of your typical Judeo-Christian religion world. In woke supremacy, if you wanted to sort of say it's a religion, their theory or myth or God is actually something negative. It's like a Satan. It's the white supremacist patriarchy. That's their thing that they're constantly referring to as the justification for their actions. When somebody Christian who's like fundamentalist Christian does something crazy, they said, I did it for Jesus, I did it for God. And it's creepy and it's weird, but they're at least referring to something that is in theory a positive thing. They're saying, although I guess they could also say, I did it to hurt Satan. So in Christianity, there's sort of two ways. They say, I wanted to act against Satan or for Jesus. In woke supremacy, it's always negative. Like, who is the god of woke supremacy? I guess it's the ethereal, disabled, transgender, multiracial.
Yeah.
Is that the god? You know what I mean? The most victimized person, is that the god?
That's the thing. Well, so the term white supremacy, I mean, obviously, woke supremacy is a play on that.
Yeah.
I think what we're getting at here is that there's a grain of truth, though, to a religious individual who's going to take things too far to the extreme,
Yeah.
because it's based on some level of truth. Well, a lot of what we're talking about with woke supremacists is they are operating from a starting point of some level of truth. There are some oppressed individuals in society, people that are struggling.
Well, and there is racism and sexism. Those things do
Yes.
exist.
Yes, they exist. And the question is, how do you address that? And woke supremacy is, in my mind, and I'm okay with it being a derogatory term, because these are individuals who are not authentic and who are not truly trying to address the problem. Or they may think they are. Again, how do we decide that? How do we know?
Well,
What's the breakdown of who's actually genuine? Or
I like you going in that direction
Yeah.
because it points to the fact that the solutions presented by somebody who is a woke supremacist always put someone else down. It's never positive. It's always like the only way for us to cause gender equality is to fire all these men off the board so that it's half women, half men. The only way for us to, fix the police brutality issue is to say fuck cops and march down the street and basically say that all cops are racist, which is a very popular talking point on the left at this point.
it's always the victim and the oppressor.
Yeah.
Always power dynamics.
And somebody who
between
comes from
groups.
that perspective of the solutions I present are always flipping the reins of power and sort of reversing oppression, that should be something that is very alarming. It is transparently authoritarian and negative and supremacist. And that's why I think you need to have this powerful armament in your linguistic, armory. If you're going to fight back, don't say social justice warrior. That sounds like a positive. People will say, like, of course I'm a social justice warrior. I'm a warrior for social justice. You need something that harkens to the negativity, the authoritarianism. And nothing does that quite like something that is only one syllable away from white supremacy, which is woke supremacy. Maybe I shouldn't be laying out the cards here if this is part of the, you know what I mean? Like the battle plan for the IDW is to start saying woke supremacy, but I don't know. I like the transparency.
No, it's
It's
good.
like, because they say white supremacy as a code word too. Like they say white supremacy when really they just mean somebody who's maybe a little casually racist or who had a slip of the tongue. I'll at least lay it out there. Like, yeah, this is a derogatory term that maybe is a slight exaggeration, but it's necessary.
And part of that is our name, Intellectual Dark Web. Eric Weinstein, who had coined the term, jokingly said that it's not really dark. There's a lot of visibility with the members, and
Well, it's also mainstream ideas that are, like there are no racists. Richard Spencer is not in the IDW. It's like there's nothing dark and creepy about it.
No.
Like it's all figures that are sort of, they have one foot in mainstream society. Like Jordan Peterson has a best-selling book. Joe Rogan's one of the biggest podcasters in the world. Ben Shapiro had a show on Fox News for a few weeks, and he has one of the biggest podcasts. These are all people who have a foot in the mainstream world. These aren't creepy, racist, sexist people like they try to make them out to be. And that's actually why I think when they're coming up, like when Peterson was really starting to gain steam, there was a heavy propaganda operation to try and make him a creepy, sexist guy. That's why you saw the custodian of the patriarchy, my favorite title ever to anything ever. Custodian of the patriarchy op-ed. That was like one of the worst pieces of journalism ever written. Because they just want to they want to take advantage of the whole idea of the intellectual dark web and make it this dark, creepy thing, when really it's perfectly mainstream opinions coming from very reasonable, smart people.